Mai, if we can get started again, please. Welcome back to those that are following along online. Just a reminder that we are being beamed out on Facebook. Welcome to the Prosperous Napier meeting for today. We have, first up, apologies. Like our previous meeting, we have apologies from Councillor Brown. Can I have a mover, please? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Brosnan, and seconded by Councillor Tariha. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
That's carried. Do we have any conflicts of interest on today's agenda? Carl, nice and easy. We have no one in our public forum. Announcements by the Mayor. Great. Any announcements from you? Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you.
To the hot seat. No,
Yes,
nothing today?
nothing.
Great. Any minor matters not on our agenda? Fabulous. Can I please have a mover and a seconder for the confirmation of our minutes? Minutes from the Prosperous Napier Committee meeting held on Thursday, the 18th of July. Thank you, Councillor Mawson, and again seconded by Councillor Tariha. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Carried. Awesome. We have had a wee amendment to our agenda today, just noting the fact that we have quite a full schedule. So the verbal update that Bill Roberts was going to provide to us is going to be moved to the next council meeting or the next opportunity that we have. And so we're going to start at number 2, which is our procurement policy review. And I'd like to welcome Sharon O'Toole to present it. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you. Good morning. So a brief summary. The current procurement policy was adopted by... Is this on? Can you hear me?
It is.
Okay. The current procurement policy was adopted in 2021 by this committee. The 2021 version was...
Sorry.
Yeah, we can't
Sharon,
hear.
you can't hear I can hear it through the microphone, but maybe you just want to move it a little closer, I think, Sharon.
Is that better?
Can you hear them now? Maxine?
what?
Can you hear Sharon speaking now?
Well, she's not speaking now.
Well, she was. Would you like to give us an A, B, C, D, E, F, G or something there, Sharon?
Testing.
Okay,
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The current procurement policy was adopted in 2021 by this committee. The 2021 version made significant changes to better align that policy with Council's strategic direction and prevailing best practice. That policy is due for review every 3 years, and that review period is now. Following an assessment, the current policy remains fit for purpose, and the recommendation is to roll or extend the review period of the current version until November 2025. The revised review date is primarily to align the policy with a review of some related documents. That includes the procurement transportation policy, which is a requirement of Waka Kotahi. Any questions?
We'll open questions. Mayor Wise.
Thank you, through the chair, and probably more of a comment than a question, I guess, and just affirming I think this is a very sensible way to move forward with this, in light of the fact the Prime Minister announced that the 4 well-beings will be apparently removed from our legislation,
Yes.
and currently this policy does include those broader outcomes.
Yes, it
so
does.
I guess just being cognisant of that fact, watching the progress of any legislation changes and how that will impact on this policy.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor Wise. Councillor Bogue.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. Later on in the agenda, we're talking about the emission reduction plan, and that points out that 44% of council's emissions are from purchased goods and services. So I'm hoping that with our goal of reducing emissions in that plan, which we'll discuss later on, to 0 by 2050, obviously the procurement policy, when reviewed, will need to take this goal into consideration. I'm just making that.
Yes, it will, and the current content allows for the environmental well-being is the language that's used there. It is a principles-based policy, so most of those targets would be achieved through the operational documentation and processes that support the policy.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair.
I struggle a little bit with the policy, Sharon, and I struggle because when I'm reading it, I'm looking for it to reflect the community's expectation. When I'm putting a political or governance lens over it, I'm looking for it to reflect that back to me. And what I think my question to you is, locally procured suppliers is what we hear a lot from our community around, for instance, how could that have gone to an outside supplier, an outside the region supplier? And there is really good processes and practices in place in here to show what any tender process has gone through to get to that result. I think my question for you is, are we being as heavy as we possibly can within the rules around giving guidance that we would like to support local providers? Is there anything more we could be doing in our policy to be more direct around that being a strategic priority for council?
We have a separate document, which is the Progressive Procurement Guide.
Yes.
That Progressive Procurement Guide is primarily focused on some of the targets that you've just mentioned. I think the real opportunity is possibly less in reflecting that in the policy, but making sure that is better reflected in some of our operational documents, so it's very front of mind when we're planning projects and planning procurement activities, that there is some baseline guidance for project managers and procurement.
So could I press you through, Madam Chair? Is there anything more we could be doing in this policy document to reflect that priority?
I think when it's reviewed, it would be really good to assess whether there's further opportunities to strengthen some of those messages. The focus currently is on making some changes to the operational support tools, which is the piece of work that was socialised with the Prosperous Committee I think that was the last meeting. Primarily the change and delay is so that we can focus on aligning that with the transportation strategy, and in that next review make some more significant changes to look at what the prevailing landscape is and what council's priorities are.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just let that sit for a little while. My second question is around triaging or triggering of how we step into procurement processes, so where things can be more streamlined and less resource heavy, I guess, in terms of managing the process. And I have the same question through you, Madam Chair. Is there anything we could be doing in this policy? And I think where possibly I'm struggling is we're not actually reviewing the policy now, we're requesting not to review the policy. So it's more discussion, I guess. But my question is the same. Is there anything more we could be doing to lower the resource staff-wise required to manage some of those lower-level procurement processes?
And I agree. I think it's less through the policy. The policy takes quite it outlines the expectations rather than the processes in achieving those expectations. There's some work underway at the moment to look at some of the systems, processes, documents and guidance that we have. And part of that is to look at how we can tailor some of the documentation for scale, for the small stuff as well as the big stuff, and also how we can look at different specialised types of procurement, such as infrastructure and construction versus general. So there is a piece of work underway, possibly not one that will be reflected in the policy itself, but more in the processes that support that policy.
Thank you. Could I ask one more question, Madam Chair? I would like to get an understanding, if we didn't agree to push the policy review out for a further 18 months, what would that mean? Do we actually have the capacity to do that sooner? Would it mean misalignment with some other work streams? What would the consequence of deciding that actually those things are something we'd like to look at sooner rather than later?
So there's a programme of work at the moment in the procurement space to look at that operational support around tenders and contracts. That's quite a meaty piece of work that's underway currently. So we could absolutely look at the policy, but we'd need to push out some of that work to make capacity to complete a review now.
Just supplementary.
Sorry.
Kia ora, Louise.
Kia ora. I just thought it might be good to jump in, probably. So, look, I just want to give you guys, or give the committee some reassurance that absolutely we are looking at how we can work with local contractors. I think Sharon's being delicate in saying, in talking to the workload. Our priority at the moment, and I would be really, I would obviously ask the committee to reflect on this, is around our capital projects. And we are trying to use a lot of Sharon and the team's time to help with us around bundling those projects. If you recall, when we set our strategic priorities for the next year, the delivery of our capital programme was our priority. And in order for us to accelerate that, we need to improve our procurement processes, and Sharon's been working quite closely with the team to do that. We still have some way to go, so obviously if we change the workload, it will impact that. And I think, as Sharon's mentioned, the fact that detail is not included in this policy doesn't preclude us from the supporting documents and working with our teams to ensure that local contractors are sought out to deliver those projects where we can. But the key thing for us is that bundling of our projects and procurement, and that also gives certainty to local providers that there is an ongoing pipeline of work and they would be more keen to engage with us as well. So it is a win-win. Whilst I appreciate for obviously for yourself, Deputy Mayor, there's a sense not quite where you want us to be, but I would really encourage that the committee support what we've got, because our priority has to be enabling the team to work with our infrastructure procurement processes to get that bundling in place to get the projects delivered. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Louise. I'm wondering, Deputy Mayor, if there's perhaps a B that we could add to the resolution to cover some of your concerns in a note. I'll leave you with that thought to see if you wanted to put some words around that. Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Just looking at the procurement objectives within the policy, that's probably the only area we need to make any adjustment. All we'd need is a fourth objective, which sets out our thoughts around supporting sustainable local business. The rest of the policy is probably quite satisfactory, except it lacks that more local-oriented guidance.
I'm sorry, I'm not. Thank you for the comment. What are you suggesting there?
Well,
that we actually change the policy?
Yeah, I don't think it needs a wholesale review of the policy. I think it's only the procurement objectives that need to be reviewed, because that could quite easily and quickly satisfy the questions being raised by Deputy Mayor and resolve the dilemma that staff currently have around a vacuum in that space.
Further on in the document, you'll see in the policy under procurement objectives, there is a subheading for locally based suppliers. But I'm interested to hear just quickly your take, Sharon, perhaps on the need for the review and how I'm assuming that there's some sort of cascading with the other reviews, the other projects that you're talking about in this paper, where they are interconnected, and that is part of the reason for the need for the review.
Sorry, could you say that again?
It's the transportation, etc. So these things are all locked in together, aren't they?
Yes. So the transportation procurement strategy is a requirement of Waka Kotahi. That's due for review in 2026. Typically, any changes that happen in the policy would flow through into that documentation, and that goes through quite an extensive review process with Waka Kotahi for approval. So this is to endeavour to line those things up.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for your suggestion, Councillor Simpson, looking for a solution there. I think that Sharon's response satisfies my need to understand why we need a review. Thank you. Do we have any further questions, comments? Deputy Mayor Brosnan, I'll just come back to you. Was there any amendment to the resolution that you wanted to suggest at this stage or consideration?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I think it's more nuanced than putting heightening an objective into the resolution. So comfortable at this stage, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, well, I will move to the officer's recommendation, the resolution we have in front of us at the moment, and that is that we approve the recommendation to retain the current procurement policy and revise the next review date to November 2025. Can I have someone to move that and second that, please? Thank you, Councillor Simpson, to move and to second. Thank you, Councillor Gregg. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor Simpson?
I think management have indicated to us difficulties around resourcing a significant review at this time, so I'm satisfied that the current policy meets the current brief, but it certainly needs to be looked at.
Thank you. Councillor Gregg.
Oh, yes, through the chair. Just a comment. Using locally based suppliers is really a good idea, so fully support. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Price, I'd like to speak to
Well,
that.
it's really a question as to review date of November 2025. Could we make it a little bit more open than that? Could it be possible to do it sooner?
The reason for selecting the November 2025 was really to align that time period so that we could go through, have the policy approved, ready to feed into the Waka Kotahi transportation strategy. So it was selected to allow time between those two things.
Does that restrict you from doing it sooner?
No, but any extensive changes, we may need to update the transportation policy, the Waka Kotahi strategy sooner than 2026.
I think we heard from our CE as well, Councillor Price, around the resourcing and the prioritisation work that's going on with the capital plan. So, I think the timing has been presented or recommended to us with those things in mind and overlaid as well. Are you happy with the response from management?
No, I'll go with it.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you. Would anyone like to speak against?
May I speak in support as that was considered a question?
A question? Yep, sure. Go for it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll speak in support of the resolution, but I do so, I guess, with that caveat that for me, the locally based suppliers and the triaging system that I think is reflected in the current policy is not ideal, and I think it doesn't necessarily reflect community expectations either. So I will support on the basis that we do have a rates crisis in this country, and no one's interested in putting additional resource into functions like this at the moment, and acknowledging that the team is incredibly pushed and is doing good work. But I do think that there is work that we could do to ensure that better flows down to our operations, and I really appreciate the comment you made around, in the meantime, and between reviews, an opportunity to review some of those operational guidance. So thank you for that.
We've had 3 speak for. Do we have anyone who would like to speak against the motion? No. Well, I will put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you. I would just like to remind members as well that once we get into the resolution and motions, those moving, those seconding, as a chair, I've decided I will not take questions once those have been received. The questioning can happen prior to and during discussion. Thank you. Next up, we have our paper on Ahuriri Investments Limited and our Commercial Director, Richard Monica. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're at that meeting on the 18th of July. The council decided to kind of pursue the concept of having a council-controlled trading organisation following the LTP work. And we're coming down now into making that real and making decisions as we can after workshops to be able to realise, I guess, the CCTO in due course. So this is our next step. This paper is our next step in that process. I just wanted to take you through some of the matters and the issues that are part of the recommendations from us to you. In terms of the scope of the what are the sort of things that the council-controlled trading organisation might be looking after, it's useful at this stage to be able to identify those assets so that we can really have a good look at them and not waste effort, I guess, pulling those together and understanding them thoroughly to go forward. So we've recommended that in principle the assets be identified by you so that we can then proceed on that due diligence phase and bring those back to you once we understand their performance and their anticipated performance and what the CCTO might be able to do with them. The second part is the concept of a strategic asset for the combined assets for the CCTO. And I'll just take the liberty of reading this part because I think it's probably, there's two reasons for that. One is it's almost the fundamental reason for the CCTO's existence is this concept of an intergenerational way of managing the assets that have been bestowed on, I guess, Napier and Ahuriri and the ratepayers rather than using them now. So in terms of that, a key deliverable for the CCTO is to create an intergenerational investment portfolio that can provide consistent improving returns to the council over time, and that would offset rates. It is therefore council's intention to protect the value of the investment portfolio in total. It's recommended that the CCTO have the full delegations to make strategic decisions for each asset under its management, subject to council's delegations and any strategic asset provisions for single assets under the LGA, but that the combined value of the assets be identified as strategic assets. And what that would mean, if that was the case, is that should future councils want to use the financial parts of the assets to offset something that may have happened with the council or whatever, there would have to be a full public process to be able to do that. So it would be a strategic asset in terms of the LTP. And as you can see, there's no recommendation from us to you at this stage, given that the CCTO is not formed yet and that the asset classes aren't specified, so we can't really recommend a strategic asset when there isn't any yet. But we do think that it would be useful for the committee to foreshadow its views on that, and so that when we do have the assets identified, and at the next paper we can craft something based on the discussion that you, or the way that the committee views it to date, and incorporate that into the reasoning why we would put that forward. So the third issue is the appointments and remuneration of directors policy. That's a statutory requirement, and the policy covers, we have one, and the policy covers all council organisations and all council-controlled organisations as well, whether they're partially or wholly owned by council. So it's like an umbrella policy for all of our council organisations. Just for clarity, this organisation is proposed to be, well, definitely fully owned by the council. It's a council-controlled organisation, therefore, and in addition, it will trade. So underneath the CCO, or council-controlled organisation, this has got a T in it as well for trading, so it's a CCTO underneath that. So that policy looks particularly at getting the right level of skills and knowledge and experience required of directors for a particular council organisation, and the appointment process and the remuneration of the directors is in there as well. The current policy doesn't really contemplate a CCTO, so while technically we have reviewed the policy, it's really a fundamental overhaul, and therefore we haven't put the existing policy there because it's such a major review that all you would see is track changes everywhere. And the policy covers not just this CCTO, but all CCTOs. So that means that the specific requirements for this CCTO need to be made within the body of the report or in recommendations specific to that fall under the umbrella of that policy. And this, for example, is the size of the board and the ratio of independents to councillors. And in the policy, the remuneration for the councillors and the board itself, whether they're independent or councillors, seeks an independent report to validate that. So that can be done by those people that are involved in that, like Strategic Pay can come have a look at the size of what is contemplated with this in terms of the asset side, the skills and all those sort of things. And we come back with the some recommendations and findings, some evidence-based findings of what would be an appropriate remuneration. So that part sits in the policy, and we would be doing that if the policy gets passed. And with that, I'll pass it back over to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. We'll open for questions. Thank you, Councillor Mawson.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. Just of note, I appreciate that Mr. Miniker said that it's major bit of an overhaul, but I'm just wondering, it could be my interpretation, but if I could just draw everyone's attention to page 29, and there's a little graph there, and it says Ahuriri Investments Management. Now, it says that the elected says served as an elected member for more than 3 years as part of the criteria there. But if we cruise to page 32, it then talks about how such appointments are for up to 1 year or such period. And anyway, it goes on to say of new elected members following an incoming election. So they seem to contradict themselves. So I just thought it maybe might have been overlooked or could maybe be something, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Mawson.
So, yeah, essentially the new election cycle won't affect it if it's 3 years stipulated. Thanks.
We'll just give Richard an opportunity to...
So, yeah, 29 and 32.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Caroline.
Through the chair, just looking at it, I think that it's okay. I think that it's in the case where there is an appointment midway through a period, so it allows an appointment for up to 1 year or such other period that enables the effective rotation of the board or consideration of new elected members following an upcoming election.
Okay.
But we can seek a bit more clarity on that for you.
Yeah, no, that's fine, thank you. And I just wasn't sure, maybe that 3-year elected member may have been from a different area as well and had the qualifications appropriate. So I wasn't sure, just wanted some clarification. Thank you.
And you have your clarification that the second iteration here, or the instance here, is to, I suppose, allow the flexibility if there was the need for a new appointment mid-term or at
I think so.
Yes.
And Gary's just pointed out too that the grey box, actually, it's an or. It's an either or.
Yeah. Happy with that, Councillor? Thank you. Good pick up though. Thank you. Mayor Wise and then Councillor Green.
Thank you, through the chair. Just in the interest of removing any confusion, I'm referring to Part B of the recommendation where the asset classes are listed that are suitable to manage by the CCTO, and Part 2 of that recommendation refers to select surplus NCC property. And I guess just wanting to clarify what that refers to. So, for example, it would, I imagine, exclude council facilities and exclude the council-owned housing. So just, just a little bit more clarity around actually what that might be that we're looking to transfer.
Completely fair point. That's very vague, isn't it? I think the difficulty has been actually identifying exactly what, without going to specific sites. But in general, what that means is that the surplus is surplus to council, a council function or reason for having that land. So it is literally surplus to our requirements. Where that is the case, and there are some other caveats in that in terms of it being correctly zoned and those sorts of things. But in the main, it's where council does not have an earmarked purpose for it at all, and whether that be a council building or a reserve or any of those things. Sometimes with the reserves it's a little bit complicated because some reserves is zoned reserve but it is actually not a reserve. So there might be some vagaries into what exactly fits under that, but the main reason is that there is no understood use of that site either in the plans or currently. Yeah.
Thank you. And a follow-up question. That was really useful. Thank you, Richard. And just confirming that would be a council decision as to which of those properties would be transferred to the CCTO. And I think this is the idea behind this recommendation, which I hope it does say that to you, is that this is very much in principle and allows us to have a look and come back to you with, in the case of surplus land, it would be some of the sites that we have been talking about in the workshop. There may be others, but it is definitely up to council as to whether or not that ends up being as part of the CCTO, or whether or not you go, no, we actually want that for whatever it is. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Councillor Gregg and then Councillor McGrath.
Thank you. Through the chair. Yeah, just to confirm, with any council-controlled organisation, transparency is paramount to the public. Can I just confirm that we'll be holding all workshops in public or in future with the council-controlled organisation?
Certainly in terms of setting it up, the idea is to do that. There may be a point where you have commercially sensitive matters to deal with that you are unable to do that because you're prejudicing that word yourselves and others. Yep. Yeah, but where possible, yes. And then once the commercial entity is underway, you're passing the torch basically for them to be able to do their business outside of the public scrutiny. So having it in public as much as possible is very important.
Councillor McGrath.
Through the chair, Mayor Wise asked my two exact questions.
How efficient is that? Right, Councillor Price and then Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Thank you. I just want to, Mayor Wise asked a question on D2. B3 with leasehold land portfolio, is that all leasehold land or is that will go into this CCTO or leasehold land? Where's the... Again,
this allows us to bring back to you what we know, whether it's the residential and the commercial leasehold land portfolio or all the parts of it, property by property, can come back to the council.
I think of West Key.
Yeah.
We've always been told that's a sacred bit of land that we should keep because of that was a sacred bit of land that we should keep. And I was just wondering where it sits on that. I'm going to a CCTO.
Well, in the interest of transparency, I think from our workshops we discussed that as being part of the leasehold land portfolio. But as I say, the final decision has not been made on that, so that is something that would have to come back to council to actually make that decision consciously to put that into the CCTO's management.
Oh, I may have missed that workshop. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Thank you. I've got two questions through you. First is supplementary to Councillor Price's on the leasehold land portfolio. Am I correct in thinking if we did choose to move the whole leasehold land portfolio over to the CCTO, we could do so on the proviso it retained, for instance, our policy on what is strategic land holdings and what is not? The CCTO in terms of its ability to divest potentially any of those assets?
Yes, so part of the process is twofold. You have a letter of expectation that goes with that, with the assets to the CCTO to say this is what we want. But I think the more, the stronger part of that would be if you wish to do that, you would have to put that into the delegations that you were giving that to the CCTO.
Thank you. That clarifies that for me. My initial question was around remuneration of elected members, which I think is something that is always of interest as well to the community on that transparency front. I found the policy a little contradictory or confusing. So on page 27, it says no remuneration will be paid without the approval of council through a resolution. On page 33, it says remuneration will be determined in the same way for elected members as it is for the rest of the board, which is where I think you spoke to earlier around having some independent advice come into that and that sort of self-determining component from a pool. And then on page 34, it talks about no remuneration being paid. And I'm acknowledging that there's different parts of the policy in terms of the CCO and the wholly owned. And I think I just found it confusing.
So what's important is that you've got to think about this policy in terms of not just this CCTO, but all council organisation and the elected member representation on those boards. So the way the policy is written is into headings under each component. And the no remuneration is really just the council organisations part of it. The other parts are not. So in terms of that, it comes back to council that the strategic pay or whoever we use to get the evidence behind what is an appropriate level of remuneration would also come back to council for a decision. So there's a process component, but that's not actually a different decision, it's the same. It's quite hard to put them all into a nice coherent, there's one part for it, but I hope that explains that it's not inconsistent.
Yeah, some way, Madam Chair. Could I ask the question, at what stage do we see this again if we're receiving it in principle? So is there an opportunity?
The policy?
Yes. So is there an opportunity to say today, for instance, I think that bit could use some work in terms of pulling it together in a more cohesive way? Is there an opportunity for us to see that again as a final at some stage? Or?
If you wish. I guess at the moment it kind of, there's two ways we can do that. It would be good to have something so that we can proceed with the next steps, get some, I guess, momentum with getting somebody on board to start evaluating the pay and all that sort of thing that is required so we can keep momentum with that. So the current policy doesn't have those, it doesn't say it says almost nothing about the process for CCTO remuneration and appointment. So we're in a vacuum without a policy. And I'm wondering whether if we can get this policy passed but we can definitely bring it back with changes even to a future committee if that was required, but at least it gets things moving in the interim.
I was wondering if Caroline wanted to provide us with any further clarification around the different structures that are represented in the policy, because I think that might be where we're coming a little unstuck, and I do understand that.
It may be, through the chair, it may be that we need to be a bit clearer in the policy. It's currently, there's a part 1 and a part 2, and in part 1 that refers to council-controlled organisations where Napier City Council could be involved together with another council or another organisation, and that part sets out the remuneration and the skills and required experience, etc. Then in part 2, that deals with a wholly owned council-controlled organisation where Napier is 100% owns the CCO or CCTO, and so that part then sets out the requirements for board appointments and remuneration, and so there's some slight differences between those two structures of CCOs.
Yeah, they're actually discrete chapters. Yeah.
So, through you, Madam Chair, I do understand that. I think in part 2, which seems contradictory to me, on page 33, it talks about remuneration being determined in the same way for all directors, elected or not. That's where that independent advice and pool comes into play. But then on page 34, which is still part of part 2, it says no separate remuneration will be paid to either council or the CEO to any elected member who is appointed by council to that organisation.
Sorry, did you say page 34, Deputy Mayor Brosnan?
Correct.
Is that part 3, council organisations, a different structure?
Oh, is there a part?
Yeah, that's right. So that's the smallest kind of appointment.
Oh, sorry, I see
Yeah, but
part
it's not
3 at the
clear.
top of that page. Sorry,
we
I
could
missed
make
part
it-
3.
That's okay.
I think we could make it clearer. Oh, as in the headings.
I do agree with Mr Munika's intention to try and get this through today. So I do understand that there may be changes in the future that can come back to committee, but I think that was certainly a point that we need to have confidence around. Deputy Mayor Brosnan, if you feel as though you've received that.
Yeah, very comfortable. And I think just in terms of discussion, I think as we move through the creation of this, there is bound to be other amendments to this policy that will need to be tidied up as well.
As an aside, it was interesting going through this process of creating the policy. There's a lot happening in this space at the moment, and there's policies flying in from all parts. I'm sure there's, and they're all quite different. It's quite amazing. So I'm anticipating as we go through, it won't be perfect first time round, and we will have to come back to make small tweaks. But I think, hopefully there's some confidence that the 95% is going to serve what you want it to do.
Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I concur with the comments made by the Deputy Mayor. When I read the policy, I too raised concerns in my mind around equitable remuneration, and I think it's something that we as a council need to carefully consider going forward. We have a policy here that's trying to kill 3 birds with 1 stone, and whether that's actually what's complicated this discussion. But I think it's even simpler than that. I think we have to be more mindful going forward about workloads and professional expectations. And if we're engaging professional directors and paying fees and expecting elected members to perform at the same level, then we should be compensating them as such. And I think something we need to look at is across all of the 3 styles of entity, what additional burden we're placing on elected members and whether we are as a council compensating them correctly.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Point taken, and I'm looking forward to our future discussions on such. Do I have any further questions or comments, discussion from members? No? Okay, cool. Well, we will move to the recommendation that we have in front of us. Part A, to approve the name, basically, of our CCTO entity. Part B, to endorse in principle those asset classes that are suitable to be transferred to the CCTO to manage. Part C, to approve a maximum of 5 directors to be appointed to the CCTO board, which will be comprised of 3 independent directors, including the chair, and 2 elected members as directors only, and to adopt the amended appointment and remuneration of directors policy as we have in front of us. Do I have someone who would like to move that for me? Thank you, Councillor Simpson, and seconded by Councillor Taylor. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor Simpson?
Yeah, I think, again, we're simply approving in principle here, and these matters will come back for further discussion, and I think it's important that we take that time to reflect on the content and what we're trying to achieve long term. This is a significant move forward for council, and I think it is important that we allow staff to progress these activities and come back with some more formative ideas around how this function and form will occur. But yeah, I think we're doing well at the pace that we're moving this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Just basically endorsing what Councillor Simpson said, and this is a significant step forward. There is going to be little speed bumps that we need to overcome, but this was a matter that we did consult the public with and got consent to move forward into this area, and I think we're going to have to consider lots of things as we move towards this, but we're making a significant step forward, and I think it's appropriate, so well done to the team so far.
Thank you. Yeah, I concur. Well done to the team. Do I have anyone else that wishes to speak in favour of the motion? Do I have anyone that would like to speak against it? No? Great. Well, I will put the motion then. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carry.
I'm still against.
Thank you. Councillor McGrath against, and that is carried. Thank you.
Madam Chairperson, I have a point of order I'd like to raise.
Certainly.
Okay, it's regards to your previous ruling that elected members cannot ask questions during debate, which I believe breaches Standing Order 21.3.
Thank you, Councillor Bogue. I'm happy to clarify. So it's not during debate, it's during the motion. So when we move from debate into the motion, that is the cut-off point for questions, is my understanding.
Sorry, clarify what's the difference between the debate and the motion?
So the motion is where we have someone who has moved the resolution in front of us, potential resolution, and seconded it, and we are in that that phase where they are speaking to that. Happy to receive comments against or for as per our standing orders, but the questioning is what sits in the debate section. And once we have received a mover and a seconder, we have moved from debate into considering the motion, is my understanding.
Well, I have a different understanding of that particular. I'll read it to you if you like. Standing Order 21.3, questions to staff. During a debate, members can ask staff questions about matters being discussed. Questions must be asked through the chairperson, and how the question is to be dealt with is at the chairperson's discretion.
So perhaps as the chairperson and with my discretion, I divide the part of the conversation that we're having into the debate and into considering the motion. Once the consideration of the motion is underway, it is my preference and using my discretion as chair to say that questioning will happen up front rather than during the motion taking place. If the motion wasn't successful or if someone spoke against, etc., and we would come back into debate to reform a substantive motion or a consideration for another recommendation or resolution to be on the table, and that's when I would open again for questions. It's simply to keep the flow of the decision as clear as possible, rather than kind of re-entering for new information at the stage where we've looked to make a decision.
I just feel, in my own experience, Madam Chair, that during the debate, during people's discussion of the motion, issues come up that I want clarification of in order to make a decision which is fully informed. And although you say that you will, not allow questions, it does say that questions can be asked. So those questions can be asked, and then you'd have to make your ruling that it's not permitted.
If you're wanting to do that, then I'm happy to use my discretion when you ask your question. But my discretion as chair has been to provide that clarity and clarification of my expectations of how the meeting will run, and I'm happy to move forward with that. Thank you. We will move on to our next agenda item, which is number 3. Thank you. We'll have Elizabeth Cordwell, our Manager of Heritage and Arts. Thank you very much.
I don't think she looks at my plate. It's breaching standing orders.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
That's okay. I think this hopefully will be fast for you. And it's a paper that you've probably are familiar with, a funding agreement. So it's a contractual matter. The existing agreement has expired and it's about a renewal. So the renewal documents are attached, the one that's expired and the proposed new one. The only things that have changed are the dates. In your papers, those are highlighted in yellow, the top of page 39 and partway through 40, and then the top of 47 and partway through 48 as the corresponding date locations where they've changed. But apart from that, it's the same agreement, and the recommendation is that it's renewed for a 2-year period. They used to be 3 years, and then when the review work got underway, they went to 1 year. So the recommendation is 2 as a precaution to complete the work that the working group is doing, and it's anticipated that that work will be completed within that time, and this makes provision for early exit if a change to the governance structure is implemented.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Elizabeth? Seems pretty procedural, but no. Deputy Member Osborne?
It is procedural. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the paper. One of my questions is around reporting back to council from the trust. It's something that my observation is it doesn't happen on a regular or a structured basis necessarily. I know we get the reports, but actually the ability to have the trust come and talk to us, is that something that you've got a view on that could be tightened up?
I believe their position is that they report through those papers because their meetings include representation from here, staff officers, but it's certainly something we can request. I'm sure they'd be only too happy to come and meet with people.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'm just conscious there's quite a changing environment in that space at the moment with our new facility over in here at Tonga being built, and I think it would be really nice to see the trust come and speak to us perhaps at their next report.
There is a workshop planned in September for an aspect of this work as well, so you'll definitely be getting input from them at that point.
Fantastic, thank you.
And I know, Deputy Member Brosnan, that there is willingness from the trust to come and present to us whenever we request it. So they're very open to updating us and keeping us abreast of changes at their end as well.
Fantastic.
Do we have any further questions? No? Great. Well, we will move to the office's recommendation that we approve that we enter into a management agreement with the Hawke's Bay Museums Trust for 2 years, expiring 30 June 26. I'm happy to move that from the chair and seconded by Deputy Mayor Brosnan. I'm happy not to speak to it.
No, happy, thank you.
Great.
Chair.
Anyone else? No. I will put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? That's carried. So, as alluded to at the beginning of our meeting, we have quite a tight schedule today, and we have some external presenters who are going to be running our workshop. So I'm just, I'm looking for, do I need someone to move us to adjourn this meeting? No? So I can just simply do it myself? So we'll adjourn this meeting and look to come back to the rest of our agenda later on today. Thank you.